Hey everybody, welcome to episode 32 of Gunning Around, proudly sponsored by EM Precision Rifles in Leduc, Alberta. EM Precision was one of Canada's premier precision and long-range rifle builders, established in 2014. From lightweight hunting rifles and precision starter packages to extreme long-range boomers, EM Precision has the expertise to get you up and running with confidence. Find them on Facebook, Instagram, and of course their website at emprifles.ca. One more important item right off the bat. Where is Ontario Tim? Still no word. Missing in action.
Yeah, no kidding.
All right. Our guest today is Shane Getson, United Conservative Party of Canada, MLA for Lac St. Anne Parkland District of Alberta. Shane, say hi.
Hey everyone, thanks for having a politician on the show.
You betcha. Where can everybody find you to get a hold of you and swear at you and stuff?
Oh geez, well Facebook is the best place for the comments and swearing portion. Other than that, it would be handy. So we're Lac St. Anne Parkland was a new constituency. We're literally on the border of everything. So just to the outskirts of Edmonton, so just west of Edmonton, literally city limits of Edmonton west. That's where our constituency starts.
Excellent. All right, John, do you have the show notes up, or is this on me today?
I have it up. Looking at the next thing we have up here, looks like special acknowledgements. I'm not sure we have any special acknowledgements. This is kind of off the cuff here. So
this week it ends up being the same thing.
Sure. So let's go into who we are, I guess. I guess I'm John, journeyman electrician, CCFR field officer, owner and operator of M14 Medic Firearms. Yeah, that's me.
Classy.
Who are you?
I'm Rooster. I'm CCFR field officer. I'm in construction management. I do the long-range precision rifle stuff. What else? Hunt when I can. Father, lover. I don't know, a few other things. Bearded fool.
Yeah.
And you, sir?
My name is Jay Beavis. I started bird hunting when I was a young man, coming from a long line of shotgunners. My father competed in international trap shooting competition in the 60s and 70s, did very well. Kind of passed that down to me. I moved from bird hunting into some archery, bow hunting, and then got into long range shooting. I still avid deer hunter. I use my bow for that, but I really like hitting steel at long distances. So I'm a hand loader as well, father, entrepreneur. Happy to be here.
Small business owner, one of those affected by the whole COVID
shut down. O'Shea's Irish Pub, we've been shut down just shy 2 months, 2 days shy of 2 months. So,
jeez, that long. Hey?
Yeah, it's been a little stir crazy not having the pub running, but
yeah, no doubt. All right, find us. Visit us at www.facebook.com/gunningaround and leave a I got John's problems here. Leave a review. Yeah, no.
It's like the HIV.
Yeah. It might be. If you care to, leave a review and let us know how we're doing. Also, if you like the content, please leave a like on the page and share so we can spread the wealth. You can also email the show at info@gunningaround.com with any questions, discussion points, or future topic ideas you want to hear about. Check us out on the web at gunningaround.com. We have some improvements coming. Actually, we have some improvements completed now. M14 Medic Firearms store is up there. I guess it's a combined store now, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of, sort of.
All sorts of parts.
If you click the link, click the link from Gunning Around, it takes you right to the Gunning Around section of the store. Mm-hmm. And then if you go in from the M14 Medic side of things, it'll get you there too. So,
right on. All right, John, you want to do your own ad?
Sure. Serving the Canadian gun industry since 2016, M14 Medic Firearms specializes in M14 pattern rifles as well as Garand rifles. In light of recent changes to the classification of the M14 family of firearms, M14 Medic will be taking a break from wrenching on M14s, but is still working on Garands. The website store is up, and we're adding new products every day. Come visit the website, m14medic.ca.
Excellent. Well, holy smokes, we breezed through that, didn't we?
Yeah, we sure did. That's good. That means it gives us more time to talk to Shane.
That's right. Or
So,
just time for Shane to talk, period.
That's right. So Shane Getson is a member of the Legislative Assembly in Alberta, Lac St. Anne Parkland. He's the deputy chair of the Standing Committee on the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And a member of the Standing Committee on Resource Stewardship. So that'd be conservation and wildlife, or something like that, I would imagine. Or is that something different?
Basically, all the minerals, the energy side of things, forestry, logging, etc. So the standing committees, we get a broad portfolio put on us, and we help decide and guide policy. And those committees are multi-party committees as well. So those are the items that we talk about and we bring to the Ledge and make recommendations on. Wow.
So I guess tell us all about yourself and what your plans are in Alberta and what you'd like to, what's on your mind, I guess, right now, as far as why you want to get out there in a public eye like this, I guess.
Well, I guess part of it too, we'll go back a little bit to the start. So I'm a farm kid. I grew up west of Edmonton by Chip Lake, and we had a mixed farming operation, so cow-calf operation as well. We did custom feeding, and in the wintertime we did logging as well. So I grew up around sawmills and running chainsaws and running equipment, and obviously working with cattle. And one of the things that we always had on the farm was firearms. So we have the little 22, an old 1994 lever action. We had the break action 12 gauge and 20 gauge. And we were brought up from day one that there was gun safety. We respected the firearms. We never ran around and did the other games that maybe some of the other kids did where they went bang and shot each other. If we did that at home, it was as if we were reading a live arm, and there was a subsequent discussion and firm punishment ensued if we ever did that. So it was instilled in us at a young age not to misbehave when it came around it. So one of my jobs growing up was to always go back and check cut lines. So checking on the cattle, checking the fences. And, some folks might know I spoke about a motion in the fall about that. It was get off the school bus, jump out and grab the 22 and head back and go make sure that everything was okay with cattle. So that's kind of where the background grew up. At that age, I, like most young men, got pretty, let's put it that way, the dating selection was pretty low in the community where I was born and raised. So wasn't intending on sticking around there, and ended up going to college, and I ended up working in construction when I was about 16 and went to Edmonton and worked for paving companies, construction companies, and then subsequently was offered a position with that company and then ended up going off to college. So I became a civil engineering technologist. Hired on with an industrial contractor, and that's what I pretty much spent most of my career, was bouncing around Canada, up in the diamond mines. We did a project up there, gas plants, expansions, etc., pipelining. And then in 2003, started consulting, started my own company, and then worked for companies like Enbridge and TransCanada. And at Enbridge, I was a senior manager of planning and execution and transition projects, and that took me all across North America, essentially. A little stint over in Germany as well on some software development. And then at TransCanada, I ended up working as their general manager of pipeline construction and field controls. So again, when all of our industries were subsequently getting under attack, and if no one ever thought politics mattered, all you have to do is look at the difference between Saskatchewan and Alberta. Arguably we were pretty lockstep, good trading partners, everything else. And then we saw a change in government out here, and thank goodness Saskatchewan still stayed blue and held the line until we could get our act in order. So that's really what got me off the bench, was seeing a lot of the things that we held near and dear to our hearts being changed, and folks that were either ill-advised, ill-informed, or had other intentions were taking away some of our rights and freedoms. And I think we've seen that in spades here recently with the federal gun ban, and obviously the differences that folks may have in large urban centers down east versus what we're seeing for realities out west.
Isn't that the truth? Hey, those stark differences between the provinces, and especially, like you say, the bigger centers. It's just the cultural differences.
The thing too is working in the States. I had project teams down there as well. So Great Falls, Montana. We had teams down in Wichita, down in New Orleans as well. Did a project down in Philadelphia on the Delaware River in Eddystone, and I would run project teams from all around the country, both Canada, the U.S. There's more in common when it comes to the firearms community than you can imagine. When I'm sitting down in the booth getting a haircut, and the hairdresser is wondering why in God's blazes we don't have Pistols allowed to carry them, and she can't understand, since we have, all the predators on our end, and they just don't get it. It doesn't make sense. Or when you go down and visit some of the snowbirds in Arizona, and you get to go out and shoot tin cans in the middle of the back, and carry a piece on your side, and it's no big deal. Again, because understanding those different freedoms and responsibilities, and the folks that are carrying are the most responsible citizens you're going to have, and those are the ones you want to be able to have.
No kidding.
Military community, same thing. It's just there's a good brotherhood there and a really good sense of respect and control.
Yeah, you talk about responsibility and that. I used to do some guiding, and I've had some guys from some states where some of the counties within those states actually require you to carry a sidearm if you're permitted to do so. It's your responsibility to protect your fellow citizens. That's the way it is down there, and that just blows people's minds up here.
The opposite.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
Well, we've seen the cultural differences of growing up. I mean, again, our community, arguably rural, it was no big deal to head over to your friend's place to go shoot gophers. It was no big deal to take the pickup that had a gun rack in the back where everything was, secured in a proper way, to just do that. And arguably today, if you did that, they would be calling 911 and you're a terrorist or something silly. So again,
when I was in high school, there was guys with that gun rack would come to school with a firearm in their vehicle. Yeah. And I just, that sounds crazy to some younger people right now, but if you did that today, is like, they give the kid a mental evaluation,
right? Yeah.
And this, the SWAT team would be called.
Well, what was it recently? It was in Australia, wasn't it? That some kid or young adult got arrested for carrying around a toy gun.
Well, there's a kid in the U.S. that got arrested for biting a Pop-Tart into the shape of a pistol. You guys remember that? And he had it at school. He bit it into the shape of a pistol and pointed at another kid. That was in the United States. So, they have their problems with the perception, probably in the bigger urban centers.
That's it.
Like the divide here. You have the rural areas that are accepting, and the urban centers that have a different perception.
So what are you seeing out there in your areas in terms of I guess the culture among the population? Is it starting to swing a little bit away from that ease with which we approach firearms typically, like what we were talking about years ago, or is it getting soft? Is it?
It's a mix. It's pretty odd, actually. So when you'll see how folks treat firearms are different than we were growing up, and arguably there's a lot of better safety protocols in place that folks, I think, naturally migrated towards and did that. But what you're seeing in some of the urban centers, not to say there's an urban or rural divide, because again, my constituency consists of both, arguably. But those that were more familiar with being outdoors have a larger propensity of an acceptance for it. Right. What you're seeing for the sports, for the target shooting and 3-gun action, those type of things, there's a higher propensity of urbanites that participate in those sports. So when you look at that, and it's typically white collar, I mean, not to get into stats and everything else and bore everybody about that, but if you're a white collar worker, then typically you have an AR-15 or you're carrying a pistol and you're going to 3-gun competitions, maybe with an FN or something. And if you're the rural guy, well, you probably maybe have one pistol that was maybe grandfathered or a revolver, right, but you're carrying modern sporting rifles, or you've got semi-autos or lever actions, or the mix. So once you start combining those ideas and attitudes, there's not as much familiarization, I guess, in the general population, because we've seen a lot of that bad noise, and arguably television and media and everything else have kind of painted what a typical gun owner is with a bad brush. And what I'm finding most often is just trying to explain why these laws are coming into effect. And one of my fellow MLAs from Calgary was trying to understand what the big deal was, and we started explaining it, and she's asking, well, why can't you just give a straight answer on this? I said, because it doesn't make sense. Right. And that's after taking her to a gun shop and having, the two proprietors that arguably are seniors. One gentleman was a law officer for 30 years, having him spend an hour with her, and she's still scratching her head and says, none of this makes sense. Why are they taking these firearms off the shelf? It doesn't make any sense. And that's literally how confusing that it's become, that a rational person has difficulty explaining it. And average person doesn't understand why you can't articulate yourself well.
Well, there you kind of nailed it there. Rational people. You've got to have rational people explaining it, and we know how emotion goes and all that kind of stuff. It affects us all. You also have to have a rational person on the other side who's actually willing to hear your stance, your arguments. That lady that you talked about, at least she wanted to know, the other side of things. But what we see in a lot of cases is that just the irrational emotion and just complete write-off of you're a gun guy, you must be a Nazi. I mean, it's not everybody, but that sentiment is heard a lot.
Well, there is. I think arguably with the firearms community, we have to paint ourselves in a different light. And again, not many people are used to protesting or lobbying or doing those things. And from my brief exposure to politics here, I've only been an elected member for a year, and I've never ran before for anything in my life until this, but ran projects, and you get to understand the different stakeholders. And again, we were talking about Canada, the US, and it all comes down to the same, where you've got some hard left-leaning people and some hard right-leaning people, and the majority is in the middle that may or may not be informed. And it's up to the two positions to kind of sway the masses, if you would, or educate them and get them in their perspective. And that's honestly, you've touched on the emotional side where folks can't understand why you're upset. Well, if you put it in the context, if it was a motorcycle, well, you just went through and banned 1,500 motorcycles. Anything that's a sport bike over 600 cc's, you can't have it, except for a couple models. Oh, by the way, anything that's a Harley Davidson, well, that's evil. That you're no longer to have it. Yeah. But we're going to bother it for you. Keep it in your garage for 2 years. You can't take it out. You can't do anything. You might be able to touch it in your own garage and polish it. And at the end of 2 years, we're going to give you what market value is now that we've devalued it. Yeah. So when you put it in context that people can understand where some of their passions or sports are, then they start to click. They start to get it. Nor do they understand the level of rigor that we go through, and we actually give up part of our charter's rights and freedoms as firearms owner willingly.
Yeah.
I feel like there's less and less of us than there has been. And I don't know if that's my perception is reality or not. But, Kurt touched on the emotional arguments that happen. And fear is often the reason of that irrational feeling towards firearms. You can never win an argument against somebody who's lost a loved one to a firearm. Mm-hmm. You're not going to win that argument. But like you said, there's the people in the middle. And as firearm owners, we talk about education all the time. But how do we implement that? I mean, one of the things I really like doing is long distance shooting to a lot of people is a really satisfying thing to be able to reach out and touch that steel target. And it usually involves a bolt action rifle.
Well, and that space you get into in your own head too, right? That escape from everything else.
And it's you in this challenge and stuff. And of course you get into the hand loading of it and all that stuff. You can go down a rabbit hole. Just taking somebody out to introduce them to just target shooting with a bolt action rifle, mm-hmm. and show them, hey, this is the responsible way to do it. That now, how easy is that to do with masses is very difficult, but you can do it with your friends and they can do that. I'm a big advocate of mentorship with hunting, because it's really hard to get into hunting. It's really hard to get into firearms if you're sitting there and don't know anyone.
Yeah.
And you want to get into it. And it's our duty as firearm owners to figure out the best way to introduce these in a safe way and show people that maybe aren't used to it. Mm-hmm. And, and a lot of us come from other sports. And keep in mind, people that are athletically minded or competition minded, this is a very competitive arena and there's so many discipline choices within the firearm community that this is a great way to open the door. We just have to figure out how to get people in there and show them that we're not a bunch of gun nuts. And being a gun nut,
we're not gun nuts, just to be clear.
But I think we just have a different definition.
No, but I mean, in the definition of a gun nut and notwithstanding, but I think we need to have rational conversations with people. And somebody disagrees with us and they're emotional and fearful, responding with that same amount of fear and irrationality and calling them stupid, ignorant, uneducated, and many other swears, it's making us look worse. Mm-hmm. It's making us look worse. Being kind and saying, oh, we agree to disagree on this one. That's probably the way to do it.
I think that has gotten somewhat better, but it is still out there. There's the really, how do I say this? The really strong believers, the stubborn guys, the use the bigger hammer rather than an olive branch type guy. They still exist, but I think overall our message is getting out there a little better than it has in the past.
Agreed, and of course I'm not condemning us all being gun nuts, although sometimes my wife would wish I'd talk about other things and hand loading, because how interesting that is for my wife and children. But
that's why you have separate times.
It's it's this, turning the passion into a positive message. That this is a healthy endeavor. It's challenging too. I mean, making a small group at 100 yards to me is one of the most satisfying things, and making a really good group at 3, 6, 800, 1,000 yards. That's an amazing thing. It took me a long time to work up to be able to do that stuff, and showing people that this isn't just a guy yelling "yeehaw" and firing a bunch of surplus ammo in the air.
We don't do that.
It's also super fun, but I mean, there's more to it than that.
Okay, so Shane, let's get back on track here, but further to what Jay and Rooster were just saying there, they're 100% right. How do you have does the Alberta government have any plans to try and educate your constituents, or how are you guys planning on combating that irrational fear of firearms, or the uneducated voter, pushing an agenda?
For us, it was pretty easy. It was one of our platform items as the United Conservative Party. Again, to protect law-abiding firearm owners and operators' rights. So we actually put a government motion back in the fall. Now, you have to understand that I'm not sure how the politics are working out in Saskatchewan, but in Alberta's history, we've never had two polarized groups as much. You have the Socialists on one side, being the New Democratic Party, and then you have us, being the Conservatives. And there's no middle ground, if you would, on some of these. We do find some middle ground occasionally. And to put it in context, I had a motion that I put in place, which was to say, okay, let's expand energy utility corridors. Let's make sure that we get deep sea port access for Alberta. Let's expand it across the prairies, and obviously look towards the country of securing energy corridors and transportation corridors to facilitate trade. I couldn't get unanimous support in the House on that. However, we did put a motion forward in the fall, and I'll just read it for you here. It was, be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly recognize to support the ability of Albertans to lawfully and in a reasonable manner own and possess firearms, to engage in permanent activities involving the use of firearms, including but not limited to hunting, fishing, or hunting and sport shooting. That passed with unanimous consent in the House. So both political parties literally stood up, and we called what we call a division, so we could get them all on record for that. Every NDP MLA in that House stood in favor and voted in favor of that bill.
So guns are more important than Alberta's economy.
I agree with that statement.
and that's part of the finer edge, right? I mean, we can get offside of a bunch of things, but when you unanimously have consent in the House of both parties to support the the responsible use of firearms, that speaks pretty meaningful. And when this new gun ban came out, it was, again, coming back to that education process. So our House leader, Minister Nixon, he actually put a new motion in, and we'll all be speaking to that. So I'll read that one up for you as well. Be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly, A, recognize that criminal use of firearms primarily involves unlicensed individuals, often using illegal smuggled firearms. B, express the opposition to the Government of Canada's recent decision to amend regulations to the Criminal Code to prohibit possession, transportation, and sale of certain legally acquired firearms by licensed law-abiding citizens. And C, urge the Government of Alberta to make all necessary steps to assert provincial jurisdiction in connection with these matters, including replacing the Chief Firearms Officer having jurisdiction as Alberta, designated by the Federal Public Safety Minister, Emergency Preparedness Chief Firearms Officer, for the designated of the Government of Alberta in accordance with the Firearms Act. So essentially, we're going to do round 2 of this and say prescriptively that this liberal gun ban is targeting the wrong folks. You're taking property from people that lawfully possess them, and rightfully so. And to essentially say our Chief Firearms Officer, we're going to take that. We're going to sign our own Chief Firearms Officer out here. So that's how we kind of feel as Albertans. We'll see if the opposition party votes as favorably as they did with the first one that I read. But that's what we're trying to do.
When do you expect a result from that?
Well, essentially, it's to get that public awareness and to show that Alberta is, strong and concentrated efforts on this. So no different than the energy file, no different than our ag file. We have to actually stand up at this point and say, yeah, we we support and we recognize the responsible use. And if you're going to be putting your time and effort in, go after the bad guys, not the good ones. Don't do the political.
Are you finding you're getting as much or less attention with this in these times of COVID? Like, is the COVID? I feel like this would have been a much more talked about topic just amongst my social group. Had not everyone been worried about what's happening with the economy shut down. Like, it seems like it's been swept under the rug a little bit. Are you finding that when you're going to work?
Like on our end, honestly, there's been some very heated discussions and dialogues on this. And I think it's because of COVID that people are more heightened on it right now. So you've got a lot more screen time taking place. Folks have, arguably we've all suffered through that of limited mobility, gathering in mass, et cetera, et cetera. And now this seems to be that tipping point again for most Albertans that, okay, now you're taking away my right to own firearms. Now you're going to seize my property. You didn't consult on it. It's almost getting to the point where one more straw, you're breaking the camel's back. Right. So out here in this end, it's pretty heightened and people are pretty upset about it.
So we got a question here from Mike.
Yeah.
Has there been any work done in building an Alberta Firearm Advisory Committee? It was mentioned in a conference call. So do you know what he's talking about? Shane?
Not sure. So we had stakeholder engagement, and then we pulled together, a bunch of folks from the community. We did it as MLAs as well as roundtables. But part of our fair deal panel that we had out here as well, it was one of the topics of point. So not to give too much away, but there'll be work that will be taking place and behind the scenes that you guys won't hear about for a while.
So you'd mentioned there in that motion about a chief firearms office, and Oscar here has a comment. Our own chief firearms office will be a huge benefit to firearms owners, ranges, and firearms businesses. I know myself personally, I agree with that statement because I've read the legislation, the federal legislation, and there's a lot of things that our chief firearms office will not allow us to do with our firearms that the law allows for, but it's a regulatory or a opinion of the chief firearms office that will not be approved. So therefore they don't approve it. There's a lot of prohibited firearms that are currently listed as prohibited that owners are not allowed to take them to the range because the chief firearms office has decided that no ranges in Canada, and this is coming right down from a federal level, no ranges in Canada are approved for those types of firearms. Whereas the chief firearms officer of pick your province could decide that range A is approved for that type of firearm, and therefore you're allowed to have a membership at that range and take that prohibited firearm to that range and shoot it there. Another thing chief firearms officers are allowed to do or allow the use of restricted firearms at other than approved ranges. They could simply say that anywhere it's safe to discharge a firearm is safe to discharge a firearm, period, dot. And now you're not limited to just taking you can now legally shoot your restricted firearms, your handguns in the back 40 of your property, if that makes any sense.
Providing it's a safe place to discharge.
Exactly, and that's always the proviso involved there, is it has to be a safe place. But how is that something Alberta's really going to do? Are they really going to go forward with the chief firearms office, or is that going to be something that is just kind of smoke and mirrors? I guess at this point is my question.
Well, I don't think our party's been renowned for being the smoke and mirrors crowd. I might not tell you we're 100% doing it, but it's getting pretty darn close. Yeah, that's where we're at. It's definitely something within our reasonable control measures. It's definitely something that's within our powers. And I think what you're going to see from Alberta's government, not to do the soapbox, but we're definitely going to be asserting Alberta's position more on a lot of different files, and this is definitely one of them.
So I guess my next question, kind of follow-up question to that one is, has there been any talk of having an Alberta provincial police force? Like right now, rural policing, just like in Saskatchewan, Alberta, 95 or 99% of the police officers in the province are likely going to be RCMP. And one of the problems with having I shouldn't say problem, but one of the little side notes of having a federal police force in charge of your rural policing is they automatically defer to the federal government's mandate when it comes to things like firearms, right? So if you have a provincial police force, the province can now say, we're not enforcing this law because we don't think it's just. Is that a direction Alberta might be going in as well, as getting a police force?
Yeah, so just a bit of a caveat there. Again, that was one of our fair deal panel items. It was something that was highly considered. And again, that's definitely still on the table. But when it comes to the enforcement of laws, that police force would still enforce federal law. But again, coming back to your comment on the CFO's position, they're still to enforce the law, but in those judgment call areas of what is higher importance or criticality or within their judgment, then that would be back to that force. So not saying the RCMP doesn't do a fantastic job for us, because they do, but what you've pointed out, absolutely, that's well within the provincial control to put a provincial police force in place. And again, a lot of it too isn't just because of, affecting the law, it's also looking for dollars and cents. If we can run and operate it more efficiently, if you still kept the RCMP perhaps as top cover on some of the files, but you had more boots on the ground that were more effective, so to speak, and could tailor-make the needs or meet the needs of Albertans, then it's definitely something worth considering and talking about.
So how achievable do you think is having your own chief firearms officer, and what kind of timeline would that? What does that look like for
very achievable, and we're carving pumpkins with the kids that could be easily put in place.
No kidding.
Oh, wow.
That is great news.
Yeah,
so
my fingers crossed that this is going to happen in Saskatchewan as well, and that it'll happen before the amnesty ends.
Well, I was going to say, will Alberta moving forward with that spur some of the other provinces to say, listen, we also would like that?
Yeah.
And,
well, you guys have to understand too, and you probably know better than most, that some of the political candor or positions that were taken were actually disputing the firearms laws that were passed way back in the day. So if you're looking 20 years back, the feds came up with some new regulations. They said, okay, you can appoint your own CFO. A lot of the provinces said, we don't agree with you. We're not going to appoint our own. We're basically going to, stamp our feet in the corner and do it.
Yeah.
Well, obviously that hasn't panned out very well for us. Now we're going to take the other approach and look at asserting some of the things that have been afforded to us, and then making sure we have, obviously the perspective of the province and the citizens of best interest. Whose
approvals do you need for that?
It would have to go through the House.
Yeah.
I think it's already the federal legislation says there shall be a provincial chief firearms officer, and then it also says the provinces, if they wish, can appoint their own. Right.
Exactly. Currently.
Yeah, the legislation's already there. Like, that's not an issue. Like, Ontario and Quebec already have their own chief firearms officer. It's a provincial appointee as opposed to a federal. And where's who else?
And they also have their police forces too.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that was one thing actually that I didn't quite realize, in the back of my head, that provincial policing is right now is tied directly with the RCMP in Saskatchewan and in Alberta too, especially in rural areas. But that was one thing I heard on another radio program, that is the first step the province would take towards the capital S word would be to appoint would be to enable provincial policing, a provincial police force of some sort or another, and that would be the first step that wouldn't necessarily lead to the whole Wexit situation, but is likely going to be a necessary step in order for the Wexit thing to happen. Is that something that the Alberta government is even on their radar right now, that might be something that goes? I know Jason Kenney has come out, and I think he's been pretty vocal that he believes in Canada. But is that something that's kind of in the back of the mind of the people that are making these decisions, that this is something to tell Ottawa, hey, we're not happy, and then just keep escalating until either they pay attention or the world comes to an end?
Well, not to put too fine of a point of it, both my grandfathers signed up and they fought for Canada in World War II. One was actually from North Dakota, and he got a call from a recruiter down there once the U.S. was going to enter, and they were basically threatening with brig time and everything else if he didn't sign up. And finally, we got a chance to talk. He told him, I can't fight for two armies. I've already signed up for Canada. It's my new country, and I'm heading over to Europe in a couple of days. So, thanks very much, but I can't take up your offer. So first and foremost, I think that a lot of the problems that we're having here in Canada, I would rather have the people that are causing the problems leave than to have the rest of us leave because of it. So that's, the first and foremost. We got a lot of really good things to offer. Do folks have some very valid concerns about what's taking place and how the East is, some of the leaders from the East, not all of them, how they're potentially treating us? Absolutely. Are people getting frustrated and tired of it? Absolutely. If you look at the federal politics, I mean, all of the West voted pretty much in unison, and yet we don't have much of a voice, it seems. That's a definite issue. But we do see at the provincial level and all the premiers, when they can agree, when they can all get together and work and come up with compromise and come up with something in the betterment of the country, even in so much as Quebec at the premier's level, supporting Alberta and asking for concessions and to get some of those transfer payments to come back to us. When we've got great partners like Doug Ford and Scott Moe that are working with us, and even Oregon can come on side and deal with it. There's lots to be said for that. It's the federal level where they're really good at getting us fighting amongst ourselves, getting us distracted, and throwing things out like this gun ban to just honestly get people frustrated and angry to distract from what they're really doing. So again, are these steps that could be asserted and taken place? Absolutely. Whether it's used for a separation type idea or a Wexit, honestly, that's not first and foremost in our mind. That's inconsequential in that regard. We're more asserting what positions and things that we have under our control to make sure that Alberta is taken seriously, the West is taken seriously, and we're taking things to heart. Anything within our control, we're going to have to start controlling it. That's kind of what we're looking at. And ultimately, that'll be put to, a lot of these topics will be put to a referendum to the Alberta people to make that choice. Again, making sure that we've got full consult and everyone goes in with this with eyes wide open.
Sorry if this has been asked before in a previous podcast, but what roadblocks for this gun ban can we see in the next, hopefully we all would anticipate maybe in the next 2 years before this amnesty is up? Obviously, if there was an election called and the Conservatives got in, that would, likely be a roadblock for it. But is there some other, I'm not sure this is a foregone conclusion that's a done deal. Obviously, we have to fight as though it is. What do you see federally? Just your opinion, I suppose, on what could happen in our favor in the next 2 years here. What would you see?
Well, this one's really a hearts and minds thing. And, if anything I did learn from politics, it comes back to that dialogue we had about influencing and educating the center. That's for the best efforts. And, rather than being frustrated about it, if you look at the environmental movement, they're great. I mean, they have professional lobbyists, they got funding coming in, they jump up and down, they block railroads, they do all this stuff. Law-abiding citizens typically don't do that. And I'm saying they're law-abiding in that sense of the right to protest. The rest of us are too busy working, doing our normal stuff, and we just want to go out and enjoy our recreation when we have time because we work like dogs and deserve it, right? So if anything we can do is that's where you get involved. You look at what the other side has done so successfully, you emulate some of those tactics, and you literally mobilize us. We can't just, I'd hate to say this as a politician, but sit there and piss and moan about it. You actually got to coach and do something, and don't just get mad and frustrated and kick the soccer ball across the room and then give up after 3 days. This is a ground war. This is literally something that if we give up any more ground here, you're not going to have anything left to give. So dig in, look at this coordinated efforts, and let's start making our voices known in a reasonable manner on the topics. You can overwhelm them with statistics, it won't matter. But when you put it back to the context of what would matter to somebody else, given their property was taken. And again, if you looked at history repeating itself, there's lots of nice poems that are posted all over these nice war museums about, first, then they came for everybody else. And then when they came for me, there was no one there.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of that context that if this can happen to literally a minority group of law-abiding citizens, then the same type of program can take place in just about anything. And that's where we have to start letting folks understand. And that's where you influence the federal level. And obviously, there was a Conservative election and they got in power. Yeah, this would be rescinded as quick as anything. You can see Aaron O'Toole is definitely pushing for that. And that would be similar to that, former long gun registry of what took place when Stephen Harper, became our prime minister.
It's especially important when you talk about the coming for law-abiding citizen stuff. It's funny. 25 years ago, if you said, listen, the government wants to track everybody and see who's run into one another, you say, are you crazy? Yeah. That's violating your rights. And others, and people are arguably doing it voluntarily on Facebook with their mobile phone. And we talk about with COVID now, they want to do this contact tracking, and that'll involve us downloading an app in the name of public health. Using fear with this, shooting. It was a terrible tragedy. To try to take our rights away, using fear, which again, this coronavirus has been a worldwide thing, but it's affected us differently across Canada. Like, I mean, Saskatchewan and Alberta are not as densely populated as New York City is, but we seem to be having all the same rules. And this federal rule for all doesn't seem to work for the firearms. It doesn't seem to work for that. And having, maybe if you want contact tracing in New York City, you're on the elevator with somebody going into your home in your apartment building. But I'm not for it. I don't. People seem accepting of that right now because they're afraid of the virus, and people often get accepting of firearm bans when there's been a tragedy.
Yeah.
And it's especially important to, like you say, dig in, let people know we've been law abiding. These half the guns they're saying they're banning have been prohibited for a long time.
What's all a lot of it is grandstanding.
Yeah,
it's all grandstand.
And it's not by accident, gentlemen. So again, this isn't by accident, this is happening. This is a plan, and they're executing a plan given a certain opportunity. Yeah, they're definitely doing that. So again, if you look at how they go about doing their business in this regard, let's take notes from it. Let's understand that. Let's, go back to it. But I'll take and give you a quote from one of my safety guys. He's a Newfoundlander, and God bless him. They have some of the best sayings. And, we're sitting we're trying to talk about the safety stats and how we can turn things around. And you've got folks at either end of the spectrum. And finally, Bruce turns to me and says, Shane, you can't tell Heinz Pickle nothing. So it's just, you give up on that side of it because you're not going to fight the emotional context that all logic goes and all reason goes. So you have to give up. And if you're wrestling with a pig, well, maybe stop wrestling with a pig and do something different here. Yeah. So our approach has to be different. It has to be above board. It has to be kind of like the dialogue we're having now. And as far as the viewers out there, definitely make your voices heard. What I've been asking folks in our area is put together a 2-minute video clip, put it on Facebook. Tell us exactly what your concerns are and why. And oh, by the way, the fist pounding thing doesn't go anywhere for anybody. Just do it in a calm, rational voice. Really understand, what's bothering you and why it affects you so much and why you feel like this is unjust. That will resonate with folks.
And don't tack on a minute montage of prairie dogs blowing up from 22 250 on the end of it. That's not going to help anything.
Yeah,
red mist.
Yeah,
that would be given. Yeah, but it's good worth mentioning. So, folks, if you are listening to this, leave up the Go for Killing thing, the pest control for another video.
Yeah, that and band together. It's long been our problem that within our firearms community, we've had differing opinions, and this is the way we should be going. No, that's the way we should be going. All this kind of stuff, and now more than ever, it's time to get all our resources, all our people together, and go one direction.
Yeah, it is. And again, if we can get there on 80% of the items, 80% of my household, if I could get an agreement with 80% of my wife, 80% of the time, holy crow, I'm walking on water.
Good, man.
That's right.
So if we can do the same thing with our own community, you got long range, short range, mid range, you got, close quarter type guys. It doesn't matter what you shoot. If anything I've seen at the gun range, everyone loves their kit. They love to show you why theirs is the best and often give you tips. Take that and apply this to the whole message and the things that we got to do. Okay, we might not get 100% of it, but what maybe we want us in the center, and let's just take that approach and let's try that for a while. And if we need to adjust, then let's adjust. But again, get off the couch, get into the game, and help us out because we're all working towards the same goal here.
Otherwise, there'll be nobody left to help out.
And part of the frustrations that I might have as an MLA, and it comes down to the political process again. Folks don't understand I'm not in Ottawa. So when I've got folks go, I voted for you, get down there and you tell that Justin so and so what, and it's like, I agree with you, I'd love to, but it's not my playing field. It's like, I'm playing for the Rough Riders, but you want me to go shoot a goal for the Oilers. It's a different game. So I'll get there and I'll put on my jersey and I'll cheer, but actually we got to get fired on the ice and we got to get them the support they need.
That's right. It's like going down to the Dodge dealership and bitching at the service manager because your Ford broke.
Yeah. Well,
that never happened.
Yeah, the Ford broke. That's just totally made up. But.
That sounds like a Ford One song. We keep going on this tractor, fellas.
That's right.
And that's part of it too. It's there's been so much I learned through the firearms community, and the other thing that kind of resonates with folks. Like in these different positions I've held as, construction manager, general manager, those type of things, you're running, multi-billion-dollar projects, and you would always have kickoffs. And a lot of the groups that do this team building type activities where you might do a I don't know, fall back into the other person's arms, or not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's just, it wasn't kind of my style. What I would do is I would take teams in small groups and then mix up which part of the project team they were on and then take them to a gun range. So nothing better than taking folks that have never shot or some have shot, and then you see them dispel a lot of those myths, those concerns. And usually out of a group of 10 or 15, there's 2 people asking where they can sign up and start getting into that community.
Yeah.
If I was looking at golf, it was the same way. Somebody had exposed me to golf. I'd never played before, but they took the time to kind of show me the game. And then actually, when I first got my license for firearms, it was because of the liberal gun ban, like the long arm registry. And I'd seen
Alan Rock. Don't forget that name, Alan Rock, cost us an headache.
So it was because of that got me off the bench, so to speak, and into that and exploring that community. And then took some courses. So, shout out to Ben Click and Sierra Riflecraft, Sierra 64. Yeah. I did a long range course with him, and I took out my Alberta Tactical Modern Hunter. So I've got a gas gun that I'm taking out there to ring out some performance on it. And I'm going against bolt guys and mixed demographics, some former military folks, just adult civvies. There was some active duty snipers there that were with us on that course. So pretty intimidating for the guy who, just does target plinking in the backyard to go sit with that crowd. But the amount that I learned in such a short time frame. And what really struck me was that most of our course wasn't pulling trigger. It was everything else. It was the breathing. It was the concentration, as you guys in the long range had talked about, getting to that zone. So I found it really interesting that Ben gave us whatever time we wanted. Our guns were already sighted in at 100 yards. He put it out to 200 meters there for us. So take all the time you want. Give me your 4 best shots. So by the end of the day, he had moved that same target set. So it was about a 1-inch square, a black square on a lime green paper out to 300 meters. At the end of the course, by most of the exercises me going through was just my breathing and getting to my own head. I had sub MLA groupings. I was touching the corner of those squares where I was hitting. So within the course of a day, the only thing that changed was me.
Yeah.
The kit was the same, the conditions were the same, just me. I have never been in a more effective management course than that. Yeah. When you start bringing out folks that see that and see the empirical difference, the results, it's huge. And when I tell that story, I actually have those targets in my office, and it's for that dialogue with the folks from the political side going, here's the difference with me controlling myself and getting into that zone. Yeah. And golf, I love it. I can't get out there and spend a whole day, but I can go down to the back, put out a target out to 100 meters, and like you said, do a nice grouping and just get into that thought and that process again. It's huge.
Yeah. You should try maple seed sometime if you can.
What's that, sorry?
You should try maple seed sometime.
Yeah, well, I'd be in for that.
You mentioned, you take 10 or 12 people out and 2 come back to the range, but you know what happens to the other, 8 or 10? They're no longer afraid of firearms. I do this on my birthday often. I'll take a group of I have quite a few employees, and I'll say, who wants to go to the gun range? We'll go down to Saskatoon Gunworks and break out some of my toys and let them play. And very safely run through safety stuff like that. And even the ones that never get back into it, they sit around when we're socialized, say, hey, remember that time we shot your Desert Eagle? Remember that time, this and that. And they're speaking of it in a positive light and without fear, because they've been exposed to it. And every time any one of us can take someone out shooting, take them out shooting, and show them the right way to do things, the safe way to do things, of course. Take the time to do it. But that the result, even if they don't get into the sport, they're not afraid of it anymore. Yep. Not afraid of guns. And those are the allies we're going to have. Yeah. Or at worst, they're not going to be against us.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, to the point. So, when you're talking about what can we do, this is what we do as a community. Take some time, take somebody who hasn't gone before and do that. So I fly airplanes as well. So I'm a private pilot, have my own airplane, and it's a similar thing with aviation. It's breaking down those barriers. It's getting people exposed to it and letting them know they can do it. And if they don't necessarily take it up, that it's not a big deal. It's not something completely foreign or they should advocate against. And a lot of this concern comes from misinformation. So when you're looking at the gun ban, they're showing a person with a select fire rifle, and then the normal rational person would say, well, yeah, why does a person need that? So they don't play fair. It's dirty pool all the time. And that's what we're consistently on our heels fighting. So to your point again, expose more people to it, get them out, forget the fist pounding on the table, just rationalize it and talk about why you're passionate about your sport.
Well, and don't get into that deception game either, like the liberals do too, because that immediately discredits you. If you start getting into the fantasy part of things.
Yeah.
What in particular are you talking about?
Well, like just using that same tactic. We're represented by the left as those guys that own automatic firearms,
right?
Whatever, select fire, like Shane said, and that's an attempt at appealing to the people who don't know, and we're trying to appeal to people that don't know firearms laws, all that kind of stuff either. So we got to be careful not to get into the same sort of game as the deception and misleading information,
right.
Things like that.
Well, one of the things that folks, they'll look at, whether it's video games that they've kind of seen them on, or it's the movies. Mm-hmm. When you look at something and it appears the same, well, then they can make that context, that leap. And I've had folks say, well, why do you need a semi-automatic rifle? Well, because I like it. That's not the argument. You don't need it. You don't need a sports car. You don't need a sports bike. But why would I not get into something that is of modern engineering and design? So arguably, if you're looking at a direct impingement semi-automatic platform, you look at the Armalite rifle, which does not stand for assault rifle. I mean, that's usually where the dialogue starts.
Yeah.
It was originally designed by Eugene Stoner to shoot varmints, that was then adapted by the Air Force and then obviously became the main battle rifle and has been evolved, et cetera, et cetera. So when you talk about the engineering side of it, and you guys were talking with the guys at Trigger Tech and everything else, being the farm kid that was never really into firearms other than having them around and seeing the old actions, when I started looking at getting into it, I did a ton of research. So then I talked to folks that own those platforms that both had served and were sport shooters, arguably went through it, understood the limitations to it, but always got something that was highly accurate, and only accurate guns are fun ones, right? So again, when I chose it was because it was a modern platform. I had tons of accessories. I could change out the barrels quickly. I didn't have to take it to a gunsmith, putting sight alignment on it. It was literally the Jeep of the automotive world is for accessories. It was the same in the firearms. Yeah. So everything I've got in my cabinet typically falls within that line. It's not because I don't like the bolt guns. It's not because I don't like the lever guns. I just did my research and that suited my style of shooting more than what some of the other ones did. Arguably I'd go back and look at some of the long range stuff from Prairie Gun Works and some of the guys out there, or EM, again, but from the time I had and where I was at with my proficiency of shooting, those are the ones that I chose for those reasons. So it's again dispelling that select fire rifle and anything that's black is bad. And folks understand that when you look at the Ruger 14, Mini 14, for example, yes, it was using polytechnique by a guy that was way offside. It was a criminal, no question involved. But if it was such a bad platform, then why did it take you 30 years to get rid of it?
Well, right.
And the ARs right after that event took place. So again, you start talking to folks and you look at the calibers, it's a 223 or 5.56. They're exactly the same. And then you show the other rifles that are out there, they're shoot the same projectiles, have the same caliber, and they're not unbalanced. And it becomes arbitrary and innocuous. You can't determine which one's which. Mm-hmm. But again, they'll come back to Rambo, they'll come back to the liberal gun page, and they'll see these things and go, well, why does a rational person need it? And the best thing we can say is, you're right, we don't, and that's why we haven't had them forever. But what I do have is a modern sporting rifle because it's modern since 1950.
Yeah, for sure. It's a 70-year-old design.
Yeah,
it hasn't changed a lot in 70 years. Like the upper and lower receiver, I think would probably be interchangeable from a rifle built in the 50s to one built in 2020. And it just blows my mind sometimes thinking about this stuff. The ones that they're the most scared about are the ones that until last year we couldn't even legally hunt with in Saskatchewan because it wasn't powerful enough to reliably take game.
Right. Oh, your deer are bigger than yours.
Yeah.
Well, sure. The lethality argument, like this 10,000 joules, which again, I don't know anybody in the firearm in any country in the working with firearms uses joules as a measurement of energy at the muzzle.
It is the metric minute. It is the metric unit.
I know that firearms people don't use it. I mean, I don't know. Anyhow, the point is, I try to do some conversions, with my 50, and turns out my 50 is about 16 100,000 joules. So of course we all know that's. But then I was using a converter on my phone, and turns out horsepower to joules doesn't quite work, but horsepower to joules per second does. And my Dodge Ram produces about 410,000 joules per second.
Yeah.
So when you talk about lethality, the reality is I've got something that creates so much energy that I drive sometimes inches away from somebody going the opposite direction. And we all know not everyone on the road is a road scholar, and we're trusting them to pass by with these things. So, the reality is these are people that make decisions, and there's a lot of power in all of our hands all the time. And this is just another tool.
And it's someone who's going to buy a sports car. You don't have to take a special license for the sports car. If you're going to buy the Dodge pickup, it's no different than you going down and being licensed and registered.
Well, no one asked the guy with a sports car, why do you need that?
Right.
Well, they're fun. It's fun. I enjoy it, and I'm not hurting anybody.
What are your intentions?
Your wife maybe have asked that question.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But it comes down to that freedom of choice. And when you look at one of the things that makes Canada and Saskatchewan and Alberta so great is that, we fought for these freedoms. We've had them established by our forefathers for years. And if there's any governments that ever are on the right side of it, it's when you have your citizens that have those rights and freedoms. And when you look at I hate to say it this way, the despot countries in the world, the ones that really hone in on their citizens are the ones that do not allow them to have these type of tools at their disposal. Absolutely. So there's something to be said for that. The U.S., they wrote it right in their constitution. Here it's a privilege, there it's a right. But again, you're always going to have those things offset by who should, in a free society, be allowed to have these. And again, arguably, our laws are the most robust in the world. It still allows us flexibilities and freedoms. And we do give up our personal rights and freedoms, a lot of the context of the Constitution otherwise, because we realize that. And as a society, we think it's just that, yes, you can check me up. Yes, you can do a background check. Yes, you should do it every 5 years. People don't necessarily understand that. What they think is you take your driver's license, go down to a gun shop, and you can walk away with a 50 cal.
Yeah.
That's part of the other side, again, being disingenuous on how the process works.
I find that very effective when I'm talking to people, is explaining just currently how it is or how it's been. And I'm really actually, a lot of people maybe get in trouble for saying this with the group of guys I'm talking to, but I'm generally a fan of the how the Canadian gun laws work. I don't have a problem with having a PAL, and I don't have a problem with registering some firearms if it makes sense. But Oscar just wrote in, try explaining a firearms safety course why 25 and 32 caliber handguns are prohibited. And then, it's an arbitrary decision not to, the Saturday Night Special and whatnot. It doesn't make any sense. And there's a lot of people don't understand. They will resonate when you're explaining what doesn't make sense, even if they don't fully understand. You say, why is, you talk about a semi-automatic, the AR-15 versus the SKS. Why is one on the list and one isn't? People look and say, it doesn't make sense. What's going on here? And we've had a lot of, generally it's been pretty good sense. You say handguns, they are in a bit of a different category. I can hide one easily and that sort of thing. I don't have a problem with kind of the rules we've had. We keep tightening it, and that doesn't make sense.
Some regulation is fine.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just backing that up a little bit, that some regulation is fine. And we all know that there's some people who really shouldn't have firearms, some people who have bad intentions, all that kind of stuff.
Or have had past problems with the law, and I'm fine with them not.
Okay, so my counter argument to that, the point you guys just made is it cheaper to track 2.2 million middle class law abiding Canadians? Because let's face it, you're middle class. If you can afford to own and shoot firearms, you have a very comfortable income, and you're likely in the middle class sector of society as opposed to lower class and maybe even upper class. But a middle class Canadian who's law abiding, hasn't broken any rules, gets a CPIC done every single day. There's 2.2 million licensed gun owners in Canada. There are 400,000 people in Canada who have a criminal record and have a lifetime firearms prohibition. Is it going to be cheaper to track those 2.2 million Canadians that are law abiding, or cheaper to track the 400,000 people with a firearms prohibition? I think our laws are more onerous than they need to be. They could be much more streamlined and accomplish the same task without all of the red tape and paperwork and automatic criminal charges when you forget a piece of paper.
When I'm educating and making
the firearms.
When I'm educating people that don't understand the firearm laws, they, like you'd say, there's people that think there's no rules. When you explain the actual rules that, some of us find onerous, some, that's arguable. When you explain it to somebody who doesn't know those rules are in place, they're like, holy cow, Canada's got to, wow, you guys have to do a lot of crap to go in and buy, like, go buy a handgun on a Saturday. They don't understand that the office isn't open to get your ATT. When you explain it to them, they're pleasantly surprised that there's these rules in place. And I don't mind having that argument in my back pocket with people who have come and say, you shouldn't be able to buy an AR-15. Like, you can't. Yeah. You can't do it. And I can't right now either, and you couldn't before this thing happened. You couldn't just roll into Cabela's and get an AR-15. And there's that perception out there that you can do that. Mm-hmm. Some regulations good. And John, I'm not going to say that it's perfect, but it's not, I don't think it's terrible either.
Well, this is John's job on this show.
Yeah.
Just the counterpoint.
To be clear, before there was possession acquisition license, I had an FAC. Yeah, and the FAC was about the right amount of paperwork as far as I was concerned. Yeah. You went to your local police station, you filled out the form, and 3 weeks later, your FAC came in. It was a little brown and dark brown,
like money paper.
Yeah, a little piece of paper. It was a card you put in your wallet, right? And it just that was perfect as far as I was concerned. That was your local constabulary took a look at you, and filled out the paperwork, did a background check on you, and then issued you an FAC. And if you ever got in trouble with the law, and they looked in the records, and you had an FAC, and you just did something you're not supposed to have guns anymore, they'd come to your house and they'd take your FAC, rip it in half, and take your guns. Yeah. And it was effective. Don't get me wrong, it was effective. When I went to grade school, we had a gun club. I remember in grade 5 shooting in the crawl space underneath of my school in gym class. We were shooting pellet guns, mind you, but the teacher was lamenting the fact that we couldn't shoot 22s inside the school anymore. But you know what I mean? That was the environment I grew up in. You know what I mean? Where gun safety and firearms handling was part of your grade school curriculum. Yeah. And that was when I think things really kind of went sideways in our society, is when we stopped teaching fundamental life safety skills in our schools. Yeah. If we still went through kids in grade 7, 8, 9, and just like sex ed, made them take, this is what a firearm is. If you see one, don't touch, or this is how you can make sure it's unloaded, or just a 3 days in school, right?
Yeah.
Anyways,
backing up a little bit, John, your argument about regulations and that you're talking about how effective, how cost effective it would be to rather track the criminals than it is the law-abiding gun owners. And this is going to sound a little bit bad, but to your point, and this is my job on this show.
John's our grounding influence. We're going to tell what to take off into the stratosphere.
to your point that if you own firearms and can afford those luxuries, that recreation time, all that kind of stuff, you're probably middle class. Yeah. Now, this is the part that may sound a little bit bad. Criminals, a lot of them, do they have fixed addresses? How do you track them?
RFID chips. You track them,
thanks
for not putting them out.
Thanks for jumping into the ditch with me.
Part of the thing that it's easier, back to your point, John, is that you can track law-abiding citizens a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Law-abiding citizens are compliant. The criminal element is not. So the amount of dollars and man effort that would be required to do that. Now, if you're out there and you're trying to make political points and put some scoreboard or points on the scoreboard, the easiest thing to make people feel safe and comfortable in the house is to say we're tightening gun regulations. The fact, I think, that it was a Toronto Star lawyer put it in context, you're going to spend potentially $600 million to $1 billion in 2 years to go buy back a bunch of firearms from legal citizens, versus the $86 million you're spending a year on Canadian Border and Customs. So again, back to the construction field, if we had an incident, and you'll get this with the construction background, if there's a safety incident, you do a root cause analysis. Then you look at the secondary or tertiary items that led up to that event. You put that same lens on what they're doing here, We just had a line strike, so you decided to run to a different province and shut down the guy who's running the snowcat.
That's right.
You didn't do anything with the excavator. You didn't do anything with the hydrovac.
No,
you
we
didn't
shut down the guy with the snowblower running on his driveway is what we did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Line strike. 3 provinces over. It's so far beyond, and they're not doing anything about the guy that was improperly operating the equipment to have the line strike in the first place. Like,
Well, the thing about that is, like, going for the legal guns, that is achievable. Doing the other right now, the way things are, fighting actual crime and securing border and that, not as achievable, not as easily achievable. Sorry, right? So
Well,
the optics of that here, we've done this.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Sorry, Shane. Go ahead.
No, it's the same point. Sorry, I'm caffeinated, so I get in there once in a while too. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
But exactly to your point, it's something that they can easily do. They can say to their voter base, here, look what we did. We took away the scary guns. This will never happen again. But again, when you look at the events that have taken place over the last 30 years, not one of these incidents took place where these gun laws would have made a hill of beans difference. And again, it's that root cause analysis. Go back and solve the problem or address the problem.
Right.
Taxpayer dollars and punish the minority here when you know that there's a flow of those firearms coming across from the US into gangs that are getting into the hands of folks that never should have them in the first place.
Yeah.
The last place I'm going to go hunting for an AR platform is from the criminal down the road that you may or may not know because you're not part of the group. I'm going to research, buy it online, do all my due diligence. The guy that's going to go hold up or do some nefarious acts would never go through that lengthy process.
No, that's right.
And that actually brings home my point that I was making earlier as well. Does it matter if I'm a legal firearms owner and I'm following on the laws and I'm crossing all my T's and dotting on my I's? Does it matter if I own a full auto? In reality, it makes our country no safer if I do or not, because I'm not going to break any laws with it.
Right.
Whereas if criminals still have access to guns, then criminals be criminals. Right?
I find it really interesting that when you listen to Bill Blair, he spouts this rhetoric about, I have full confidence that law-abiding gun owners will in fact follow the law. If we make these bans, they will follow the law. I have no reservations about that statement at all. So, but somehow he doesn't believe that the current law-abiding gun owners follow the laws that are in place now. Yeah. Like, what a contradictory bunch of shit.
And if you go back a few years, you can see his own standpoints on the effectiveness. I think it was back about 4 years ago. He basically regurgitated everything that we're saying here from our law enforcement perspective. These gun laws don't make a hill of beans difference. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but It's not about fixing the environment. It's not about taxing carbon. It's all about hearts and minds and feelings and emotion. They're saying one thing and doing another. And that's
the illusion of safety, to quote Brad Pitt in Fight Club. I mean, the safety position on a 747 crashing into the ocean isn't going to do much for you, and neither will this. But it's the illusion of safety. Everyone, oh yes, we're banning firearms. Trudeau's saving everybody. Without these conversations, the illusion continues. The people believe it.
Yeah.
And back to the
crash position just shoves your head up your ass.
And just
when you
calm as a Hindu cow.
You were saying, Jake?
Well, there's a couple of things. Now you're getting on the animal side, but there's an effect. You can boil a frog. You just put them in the water when it's tepid. You turn the temperature up. So that's been proven time and time again in history with civilizations and people as well. So, but back to the education part, where we had education on the farm growing up. I never took a firearms course at school, but I did, like I mentioned, did the course with Ben, and I also did a close quarter combat course as well with transition with pistols and carbines and moving targets and under duress and time and everything else. But again, by former military guys that were airborne that put this course on in our current law enforcement community. That's what they do for a living now. Mm-hmm. And again, they're active duty snipers. So it was interesting after doing that first course. I met some folks from all over the place. One of them, made a really good friend who's an emergency room physician. Now this guy runs a Tavor, and he's phenomenal at it, and smooth and cool and collected, in the epitome of professional all the way through. You wouldn't take that from him when you see him in the operating suite, where he's actually the guy, eating up the 3-gun course. So there's an avenue and an outlet. But I did get my 14-year-old son, after going through that first course, to go with me on a second course. And those guys, based on my performance and how I behaved, took a little bit of a leap of faith to teach my son. Well, my son's, 16 now, and he's about an inch taller than I am. I'm sitting 6'2". So it was a couple of years ago when he took the course. But he took the hunter's training course in his school. And he came back and said, Dad, I cannot believe the teacher. He was lazing everybody. He wouldn't put, the port side up. He was, and, his arguments about trigger control, and my son is just cringing. Again, depending on who's teaching those courses and those habits, but educating people and having that 14-year-old roll ahead 2 years and correcting his teacher, saying, like, you can't do this. Here's how you handle a firearm. Here's how you treat it responsibly. And not a kid that goes out and plays first-person shooter games or does that, but he has his own set of tools at home that he and I get a chance to go down and enjoy. My daughter, who's 9 years old, developed an allergy to pumpkins. So this little girl there, she couldn't part pumpkins for the last couple of years. Well, this year she was big enough to go down the back. We painted up the pumpkin with some felt marker, and she could use my semi-automatic 22 to carve that pumpkin. Again, since 6 years old, she's been using her little pellet gun, and we have a little firing range. And this is something that we do as a family. And again, a little bit different than what you might do in the city. But when you talk to the folks that are from that community, firearms community, or from rural, they kind of get it. It's almost like hockey. It's a rite of passage. It's a cultural thing. Sure. And, some of these family heirlooms get passed down. We might not have tiaras, and we might not have fancy china, but that old 1894 lever action that Grandpa packed around the bush and got a few deer to put food on the table during the 30s, well, that's still probably hung on the wall. Those are things that resonate with.
I've always equated parents and grandparents and uncles' firearms just like jewelry. It's heirloom jewelry. My father got second place 1964 a trap shooting competition in Minnesota with a Remington 870. Wow. And I have that firearm, and I never, out of everything, if I lost everything but kept that one, it'd be the last one I would give up. I want that as part of my father's life and achievements. It's a big deal to me. I rarely shoot it. When I do go goose hunting these days, I do take that. It's 2 3/4 inch, but it's just a giant piece of my soul. And it's hard to explain that to people. These things, they see them as this weapon, this deadly thing. And to me, these were, machined pieces of the 870s, the old ones. It's a beautiful firearm. It sounds different. And sorry, I'm kind of waxing on about it, but the thing is, people don't understand this connection that a lot of us have with these firearms. I remember walking with my father down a dirt road right after harvest, looking to flush up some upland game, and the smells and the warm sun of the fresh harvest and the sound of the birds, these are all experiences that are going to go away. Now, I know the 12 gauge is arguably, now if you have a unchoked 12 gauge, we're looking at that diameter problem, but it's like you said, it's just the frog in the pot. When are my kids going to have to give up Grandpa's gun that he plays second place, busted 199 clays out of 200 in 1964?
Their way, they'll never see them.
They maybe will never see it. Maybe my kids won't care, but I'm going to make them care. But I'm going to teach them that that's a big deal. This is a thing that was as important as a piece of jewelry, grandma's jewelry.
I guarantee your daughter will be
our generation either. I remember my grandmother speaking. She had this little 22 Cooey, and her great grandfather had it. So, that was when the gun registry was coming out. And she goes, I'm law-abiding citizen, Shane. Should I go register this? And I just smiled at her and said, Grandma, I don't know. If I was you, I just might forget about that for a while. Again, her concern was that, to your point, she would have to give up something that she, as a little girl, had spent time with her grandfather out down in Pincher Creek in the Nat area, going after some small game. Those are memories and tactile connections that I think we as humans, that's how we connect. There's some of that history, that legacy to it. And it's the time you spend around it. Even the arduous thing of cleaning a gun. My son and I have had some fantastic conversations just out in the garage, cleaning rifles and talking about things that are going on. It's oftentimes those distractions that bond us and connect us.
Unfortunately, today you got to leave the garage closed when you do that, or somebody will call the police on you if they see you and your son with a couple firearms. But that's what's changed. This thing, we joke about the incremental removal of our rights and our abilities to experience all these things we're positively talking about. Maybe it's not a good idea for kids to take guns to school today. The things have changed since we were kids. That's okay. But, should everyone be so fearful of a father and a son? Clearly in an activity of cleaning these firearms, bonding, there's such hatred towards firearms.
I've had
in
my
some cases.
son's friendships destroyed because mommy knew that I had guns and wouldn't allow her son to come over to my house. And her son and one of my sons were extremely good friends, and no amount of talking to her would make any difference whatsoever.
So your boy just went over to her boy's house and played Call of Duty all day.
Well, right.
It's safe.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm not sure what they did over there.
Okay, guys, sidebar.
Sorry.
Hey, let's ask this question here.
Sure.
Robert McMorrin, how actually effective are these petitions going around? Once something is read in the House, most just get a number and cast aside, nothing done. Your thoughts, Shane?
Yeah, so it depends which ones. Like, again, coming back to the point where folks can be really lazy and you can do these online surveys or these online ones, unless, from my understanding, from what I've seen here so far at the provincial level, unless I physically have some signatures on a page, like there's an actual process. And a lot of our laws are antiquated for what we have for technology, because technology moves so darn fast and arguably laws move so slow unless someone does it like an order in council. Notwithstanding that, if you can give me a written petition, then I can have that dialogue in the House and we can take care of it. If you contact your MLA, then we can have a motion and do that. If it's a government motion, you can bring it forward. They are effective. Believe it or not, as goofy as it seems, if you give me a bunch of signatures on a page and people are willing to stand behind it, that gives me, pardon the pun, ammunition to use to prove a point and to say I am representing the population. So yeah, as goofy as it sounds, keep it up, write your MPs, put your pen to paper. Those are the most effective ones. And if you have a bunch of compatriots that do the same thing, then that makes total sense.
There's been a lot of doubt with that because there've been seemingly so many petitions and letters written. John, your experiences personally with that, it just seems like it doesn't make a lick of difference at all.
Well, it's frustrating. And again, but the dialogue we're having now is probably more effective. But again, on the political side, they have to pay attention to it because it's law. When they literally read the orders of the day, one of them is presenting petitions. Not often do we have them, but when we do, they're presented, they become record of evidence, if you would. Now, it depends what the governments want to do with them. If, again, they want to consider them or otherwise, but you get enough voices that are pen to paper, you have to listen. It's literally a physical record of evidence that you have to talk to it, and then you can call it up later. Again, it's providing the means and the ammunition, if you would, so you can do something as a legislator.
Alrighty, I think it's time to wrap it up here, guys.
I think so. Yeah,
we were supposed to aim for an hour, and we're at an hour and 15 right now. So
that was going good.
It was going really well. It actually was. It's a good episode. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, it was nice to meet you, Jay. And Shane, I had no idea who you were or what you were about, but I seem to think that you and I could probably sit down and drink about 18 dozen beer and have a good time. So.
You're okay.
Yeah,
I'm a little behind those times. I might not keep up yet. But really appreciate you guys having me on as well too. And if there's follow-up questions or anything from the folks that are online, absolutely share my email address with them. And again, from the Alberta folks that are on this, we're working on it. It's something that we only have so many limited tools, but we're going to dig our heels in hard on this and make sure that people understand where we're coming from and why it matters and why this legislation or the act that they put in place is completely wrong and counterintuitive. And again, put it to that context. If we as law-abiding citizens can't have a voice right now with, the scrutiny that we go under, no one else has a snowball's chance in hell if they come after your stuff. Like, let's put it in context.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for all you're doing.
Yep. You bet.
Appreciate it. Thanks, folks.
Thanks,
all right, everybody.
Thanks to everybody that listened in and watched us to the end here. Thanks a lot for that. Parting shots, Jay?
Keep recruiting. Keep talking positively to people. Take them shooting. Just take people shooting.
Yeah.
I've said it 10 times on the show already. Take them shooting. It's a way to get people on our side, or at least not against you. And most people, when you're one-on-one and you're acting professionally and safely, they see us as in a different light than the gun nut, you know.
That's right. Kurt?
Yeah, much the same thing. And get together with your fellow gunnies. This division that's plagued us for a long time clearly is not as effective as all of us together as a whole.
I agree.
Yeah, that's really about it. Just to add to Jay's. What about you, John?
I would have to say, write your MP, write your MLA, write them a letter.
Yeah.
Tell them how you feel and how this affects you, and just make your voice heard, if nothing else. I've tried it, and it seems sometimes like you're banging your head against the wall, but every time you can give your MP or your MLA a piece of paper that says, "Hey, this is how my constituents feel," you're literally you're actively participating in the democratic process, and that's important, especially in this country. Oh, thanks for coming on, Shane. Good episode, guys.
You bet.
Thanks to the listeners for listening. And
all right,
cheers,
see
everybody.
you guys in a couple days.
You bet. Saturday, come on out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stay dead.